Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be covering Federalist number 9 and 10. Number 10 in particular is one of, if not the, most well-known of the Federalist Papers. The theme of these papers are the utility of the Union as a safeguard against domestic faction and insurrection. Federalist number 9 was written by Alexander Hamilton, and Federalist number 10 marks the first contribution of James Madison to the series. But without further ado, let us begin. So, Hamilton's goal in Federalist number 9 is to assuage concerns that the Constitution's proposed republic will inevitably fall apart or be corrupted like so many similar forms of government throughout history. Why have so much faith in the Constitution, especially if its model is in part based off of designs of other systems that ultimately failed? Well, Hamilton says, the science of politics, however, like most other sciences, has received great improvement. The efficacy of various principles is now well understood, which were either not known at all or imperfectly known to the ancients. The regular distribution of power into distinct departments, the introduction of legislative balances and checks, the institution of courts composed of judges holding their offices during good behavior, the representation of the people in the legislature by deputies of their own election, these are wholly new discoveries, or have made their principal progress towards perfection in modern times. They are means, and powerful means, by which the excellences of republican government may be retained and its imperfections lessened or avoided. The Founding Fathers were well read in political theory and history. To that end, they were able to study the past and take from it the greatest ideas and combine them with promising new Enlightenment ideas and values. Hamilton is saying that the framers adopted and improved on all the best aspects of the past republics in order to create the proposed American Republic now up for ratification. From here, Hamilton moves to counter the charge from anti-federalists that the large republic that the Constitution prescribes is non-viable and harmful to the sovereignty of the states. Remember that at the point this essay was published in 1787, it was normal for Americans to identify their home state as their country way before any central authority. Anti-federalists argued that exclusively, only small republics could ever last. That is, literally small in territory. To support themselves, they cited passages of the French thinker Montesquieu. Montesquieu, and his book, The Spirit of Law, were incredibly influential on the founding generation and on all sides of the Constitution debate. Hamilton goes on to accuse his opponents here of misreading Montesquieu and of failing to consider the consequences of the small republic constraint they are advocating for. When Montesquieu recommends a small extent for republics, the standards he had in view were of dimensions far short of the limits of almost every one of these states. Neither Virginia, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, North Carolina, nor Georgia can by any means be compared with the models from which he reasoned and to which the terms of his description apply. If we were to take the anti-federalists' strict adherence to Montesquieu's theory seriously, the size of several of the states would be too large and they would need to be split up. Whatever the case, Hamilton says that when Montesquieu was talking about limits on size, he was not referring to the size of a confederation, but that of its parts. In fact, so far are the suggestions from Montesquieu from standing in opposition to a general union of the states that he explicitly treats of a confederate republic as the expedient for extending the sphere of popular government and reconciling the advantages of monarchy with those of republicanism. It appears that Montesquieu is on the side of Hamilton and the Federalists here, and it seems that in this respect, the anti-federalists are using someone who disagrees with them as their avatar. Hamilton spends the rest of this essay explaining why a Confederate republic is not a threat to the states. He says that the definition of a Confederate republic seems simply to be an assemblage of societies, or an association of two or more states into one state. The extent, modifications, and objects of the federal authority are mere matters of discretion. So long as the separate organization of the members be not abolished, so long as it exists by a constitutional necessity for local purposes, though it should be in perfect subordination to the general authority of the Union, it would still be, in fact and in theory, an association of states, or a confederacy. A union under the Constitution is not a threat to the states because it leaves important powers and duties exclusively to them, as well as offers the states seats in the federal government. In theory, the inherent decentralized aspects of the Constitution should protect states' identities and ensure that they have measures of control over their own affairs. The topic of federalism and state sovereignty is still very relevant today. To what extent and on what matters can the federal government create and enforce laws onto the states? How far can states go in creating their own policies before they violate the principles of the federal government? This debate is alive and well in the likes of battles over immigration, abortion, public health policy, and election law, among other things. And so, thus ends Federalist number 9, with more arguments for a large republic to follow in number 10. Alright guys, this is it. It's the big one. The major topics of discussion here are about factions and the distinction between a democracy and a republic. Fortunately, Madison's writing is very clear and well structured. I feel like he basically did my job for me. Madison launches Federalist number 10 through a continuation of some themes from 9. The American Constitution has undeniably made improvements on previous models of government. However, it is not perfect. No system ever is. The attendant evils of factionalism are yet ever present, but, as Madison intends to argue, the proposed union is the strongest barrier against the worst of unchecked factions. But what exactly are factions? Well, the answer is clearly laid out by Madison. By a faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest adverse to the rights of other citizens, or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. Essentially, a faction refers to a collection of people united through a shared interest, belief, or feeling that is not generalizable to the broader community. The most common example people think of when they hear the term faction are political parties. While a political party represents a certain segment of the population, their goals and desires are often contrary to other parties and are unlikely to be entirely representative of the general public. And so, factions are a threat because of their frequent propensity to divide the people and pit them against each other in desperate contests that often end in tyranny. So, what can we do about factions? How do we prevent them from pursuing their own interests at the expense of everyone else? Madison's reply is that there are two methods of curing the mischiefs of faction, the one by removing its causes, the other by controlling its effects. Okay, so we can either stop factions before they form, or we can carefully manage them. Let's look into the first option, preventing factions before they emerge. Here we find that there are again two methods of removing the causes of faction. The one by destroying the liberty which is essential to its existence, the other by giving to every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, and the same interests. So, to shut down the creation of factions, we must either deprive the people of their freedom, or we must render it so as no one ever disagrees about anything. Madison says that the first option would be a cure worse than the disease. Liberty is to faction what air is to fire, an ailment without which it instantly expires, but it could not be less folly to abolish liberty, which is essential to political life because it nourishes faction, than it would be to wish annihilation of air, which is essential to animal life because it imparts to fire its destructive agency. While it's true that liberty leads to faction, to destroy liberty, in order to destroy faction, would be to throw the baby out with the bathwater. A gross overreaction. You don't burn down your house to get rid of mice. Of the second option, Madison says it is impractical to render it so as everybody has the same opinions and desires on everything. Right? How would you even do that? You would have to make everybody fundamentally the same, and let them hold possessions only exactly equal to each other. Otherwise, they will inevitably form different interests. Such a scheme exists only on paper, and in truth, it's just another insult to human agency and expression. So, as it turns out, we cannot inhibit the birth of factions. The latent causes of faction are thus sown in the nature of man, and we see them everywhere brought into different degrees of activity according to the different circumstances of civil society. It is human nature to disagree. In every case, we will make different observations, reach different conclusions, form different opinions, and hold different goals. And it is only natural that we team up with others who think the same way we do. The unfortunate part is that it is hard to balance all these competing interests in governments where the people have a say. Right? None of this would be a problem if we had a monarch make all our policies. But when power derives from the people, you have a government trying to reconcile and distill the voices of the many into one. Anyway, as we can't remove the cause of faction, that leaves us to try to control their effects. A minority faction isn't really the problem, because in a government like ours, the minority faction or party can't pass laws without getting outvoted. So, the real threat to the Union is majority factions. Is it really right for 51% of a group to inflict their personal views and force their interests on the other 49%? Not so, says Madison. And so, either the existence of the same passion or interest in a majority at the same time must be prevented, or the majority, having such coexistent passion or interest, must be rendered, by their number and local situation, unable to concert and carry into effect schemes of oppression. Sounds great. How do we do that? Well, the solution lies entirely in the type of government. And now we must consider the difference between democracies and republics. The distinction here has become confused today. People often say that America is a democracy, but this is not the case. At least not directly. Rather, America is a republic. You see, in a pure democracy, every policy or law would have to be open to the vote of all the people. And in practice, voter turnout would likely be incredibly low. Think your local elections here. Meaning that, in effect, the entire government would be controlled by the whims of the majority of the few who consistently showed up. So Madison says that the two great points of difference between a democracy and a republic are, first, the delegation of the government, in the latter, to a small number of citizens elected by the rest. Secondly, the greater number of citizens and greater sphere of country, over which the latter may be extended. In other words, a republic differs from a democracy because, in a republic, we elect delegates to represent us and create the laws, and republics are better than democracies because they are simply bigger, which allows more people to be represented. To elaborate on the first point, Madison's contention is that, in theory, we would elect individuals with lifelong commitments to the public good and a proven track record of prudent judgment to mediate our desires. Now, a large republic is more likely to achieve this than a small republic, because a greater number of people will choose the best out of a greater number of candidates. While in real life we have definitely elected some, for lack of a better word, losers, the idea is that they would be offset by other, better delegates, and we could just vote them out next election. Now, on the second point about republics being better than democracies because they represent more people, like I said, in a pure democracy, people would not be knowledgeable or eager enough to vote on every single bill, except those with the greatest self-interest in a particular outcome. So instead of having one motivated faction dominate the entire course of government in a democracy, in a republic, though factions still exist, the delegates voted in will introduce and represent a variety of them. Not only that, there would hopefully be sub-factions within the majority party. If so, the more substantial the policy, the greater the need for a broader consensus to enact it. Madison concludes Federalist 10 by pointing out that even if an entire state fell to the transient wiles of some demagogue or idea, such malevolence would be counteracted by the cooler heads of other states and the greater union. So to wrap things up here, the genius of the founders is that they anticipated the pitfalls and shortcomings of human nature and accounted for it within the Constitution. In doing so, they constructed a republican form of government that incorporates the inevitable evils of factionalism and utilizes it against itself in order to create balance and temperance, all the while representing more people and interests better than a democracy could. Whew, that was a lot. What do you think about the reasoning made in this video? Did it hold up well over time? Are Federalists 9 and 10 prescient, or are they out of date? I'll leave that up to you to deliberate on. If you found this video helpful or informative, please do consider subscribing. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a good one.